Hi, I'm Dan, a psychic medium, Reiki master, and massage therapist.
And I'm Zee, a psychic medium, intuitive coach, and Reiki practitioner,
And welcome to Supernatural Scuttlebutt,
a podcast dedicated to spreading spiritual awareness
metaphysical insights.
and supernatural conversations between two healers.
So sit back
Relax.
and enjoy the show. Hey, welcome back to Supernatural Scuttlebutt. I am Dan.
And I'm Zee, and we're glad you're here.
Thanks for joining us again. We're happy that you guys have been watching. If you've been following us, thank you, thank you. We appreciate that. So, what are we talking about today, Zee?
So these are our own true life supernatural stories that we wanted to share. These are actually things that have really happened to us. So, Dan, how about you? What are you going to share?
I have a couple different stories, a couple ghost stories, a couple memories or nightmares as a kid that didn't really feel. I remember them as my nightmares or dreams, but I feel like they were real. It's been so long, I don't remember. But a couple ghost stories, a couple childhood stories, stories about my town. And I actually have one unexplained phenomenon, UFO type story, which is really interesting. And I have witnesses for it to confirm it. So it wasn't just me. It wasn't just me and somebody else. Somebody else that was a third party witnessed the whole event. So that's kind of a cool story I always like to share.
Oh, wow. And I want to tell everybody that since we were kids, and we've talked about this in all of our unofficial meetings at Beach Dreams, you and I both have had these experiences. And at a certain point, denying these experiences feels crazier than just saying that just happened. I have no explanation for it, and just kind of going with it. So there might be those of you out there who have had the similar experiences, and that's why we wanted to share ours, because we have fully embraced them. We understand that they're part of the supernatural and part of our spiritual experience.
Yeah, I think I want to add too, a lot of stuff in Hollywood and movies and TV shows. It always has like a certain perspective on ghosts or hauntings and the spiritual realm. It's fun and entertaining to watch. Like one of the biggest movies of all time was Ghostbusters. But then when these events happen to us in real life, it's kind of like, did this just really happen? What is going on? It's hard to believe that it's not just in movies and TV and it's happening to you when it does happen. And then when it does happen to you, you're kind of like, what do I do with this information? How do I break this apart? What do I do with this experience? How do I equate that to my life? Who do I tell? What do I even do? You feel a little bit victim. You feel like, well, I'm not like a victim, but you feel a little bit like weak, because there's no resolve to it. It's just something that's out of your control that you experienced. You can't explain it. And I think that freaks a lot of people out, not having total control of their environment or their mind or whatever.
Yeah, and I want to say a couple things about that too, because I had to quit watching all those scary movies. I had to do that because most of the scary movies now give evil such power, and evil wins. And it isn't like that in real life. And I didn't want to face something in the middle of the night that was going bump and I knew was out of the ordinary and think that it was something that was so powerful, because actually we're more powerful than that, and we have the ability to be able to protect ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. See, I think in a lot of those TV shows or movies, there's always this like you're unable to stop the evil. The fear is all encompassing, the darkness, the worry, and kind of part of that is part of like almost like a witchcraft ritual is to engage you and to allow the fear into your life. And that fear becomes the hook to pull in all of these worries, these doubts, these insecurities. So these scary movies that you like, a lot of people are like, I know, love scary movies. Not a big fan, just not a big fan. I don't like a bad ending. I don't like the horrific things that happen. But we do have this relationship with spirit, and it's a little bit lighter, I think, than what Hollywood likes to portray that grabs our attention.
Absolutely. And just like on Zoom, we have all these different filters that you and I were having fun trying out and just seeing what that would look like. Fear is a filter. And if you're filtering everything through fear, especially like I said, in the middle of the night, or you're in an empty house and you don't know what's happening, but you're seeing something. That fear filter is debilitating. It doesn't allow you to move forward and be able to investigate and maybe debunk something, or maybe say, wow, that was the coolest experience ever. You'll
Hmm.
always be looking at that through fear. And I feel like that's what happens sometimes. Like I've told you, and I've told the people out there, that my aunt was an exorcist and her husband was an exorcist. So um, they looked at everything from that filter. So everything was evil and bad. So you could have a loving visitation from somebody on the other side, and it was still going to be really something that wasn't biblical, and it was bad. It says, my husband always says, if all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if your hammer is fear, then anything that comes up in front of you is going to be that debilitating. I'm using that word again because it will stop you in your tracks, and you'll just be frozen by fear, and you won't be able to investigate or communicate or determine what was really happening.
Right. I think also like I've heard from other, other people that go down that line of thinking that like say you get like a friendly encounter with your passed on loving grandmother and you thought you saw her and you felt her energy, but then you tell somebody that's in that camp of fear and they're like, that wasn't your grandma, that was a demon pretending to be her. And you're like, whoa. So you just turn this beautiful experience of connection to the other side into this other thing now. And now you're even more scared if something like that would happen again. So you're kind of planting that seed of fear that grows every time some sort of one of these experiences
Absolutely.
and these
Absolutely.
encounters that you have, like you think immediately, like you said, that was perfect. That lens of fear, that's how you see everything, and it makes you not want to interact and clamp up and go reclusive and shy away and shrink more, right?
Right. And it's not healing for you. It's
Not
very
healing.
healing when you hear from the other side and you know
Exactly.
how loving that is and what that communication is about.
Right.
So you and I even have encountered that when people have asked about psychic mediums in the area in which we live, and the response is, "You can't contact those people. Those people are evil and they're horrible, and they only represent the dark side." And here we are trying just to help people communicate, to have a loving interaction, and to feel comfortable that their loved ones are on the other side and they are able to talk to them if they want to talk to them, and that we are working through the light and for the light and by the light. And I know we're kind of getting away from our stories here, but I just want to say that anytime you and I work, we always ask for it to be in our highest good and the highest good of everyone involved, including our clients, those on the other side, our guides and angels. And we have that deeply spiritual connection.
Right. One point to add to that, in all the readings I've had, all the mediumship readings, all the energy work that I have done in my career, since I've been doing this, working with you, working with other people that have the same vibration, same loving energy, same healing energy, I have not encountered any type of darkness trying to tap into my energy field to contact a client. It has not happened. It just doesn't happen. So to think that, it's a little bit ignorant, of course. But like was he was saying, whenever those posts are up on Facebook, there's hundreds of comments that are like, "Save your money, they're scam artists. They're trying to just take you. You're allowing the demons in." But if you look at culture for indigenous people around the world, they all have stories of ghosts, supernatural encounters, beings visiting them from other planets, connections with the other side. You have shamans connecting to the other side, talking to the spirits way before there was a church, So you're putting that fear lens with the church, with the dogma. And I'm not trying to, question anyone's religious beliefs, but this stuff has been around before Christianity. This stuff has been around since the beginning of humanity. It's always there. So to kind of like put that fear lens with this kind of like, little box of just seeing it through that, you're kind of limiting yourself to the grand scope of what's going on in these unseen spectrums that we can't see with the human eye.
Right. And I'll add one more thing. And I know we need to get into our stories, but I'm the first one to pray around it, anything. Prayer is my go-to. So I pray around my readings. I pray around us. I pray around us when we do these podcasts. So um, We're not, as Dan said, we're not, throwing shade at religion. We're just reacting to some of the things that we've seen.
Right. Well, this actually is interesting that you took the conversation down this route because my first story is like about me being fearful from the encounter. Okay. And taking that lens before I knew more about this stuff and I took it forward, like freaked out and not knowing what to do. So this is a quick one. It wasn't anything major, but I remember probably about like 12 years ago, I was lying in bed. I must have woke up at like 2, 3 in the morning in the middle of a sleep, couldn't go back to bed. We've heard that from many people that have encounters like this. I didn't feel a presence in the room, but I heard a whisper go, Daniel, and I freaked out. I put the covers over my head and I spoke out loud in my room and I was like, I don't know who you are or what you want, but I'm really freaking out right now. Can you please just go away? And then like 5 seconds later, I just hear a small, okay. And that was it. And that was the encounter. That was the story. But that freaked me out enough to be like, I had that fear mode too. I was really scared of spirits, of demons, of witchcraft. I was like looking into the occult. So I thought maybe I was tapping or attracting in some negative energy that was contacting me. But it didn't feel aggressive. It didn't feel forceful. It was very like shy and quiet and peaceful. It wasn't aggressive or angry. So it was just my perceptions turning it into the monster under my bed that wasn't there, right?
Yeah, so here's your grandmother going, geez, I didn't know that we raised such a wuss. All I'm
Right.
trying to do is have a conversation with you.
I'm just trying to say hi, you jerk.
Pardon me. Well, I'm going to tell this. This actually happened. This is something that truly happened. This is a story about my dad. And when my father crossed over after a long battle with cancer, I thought I was holding it together pretty well. He was very loved, and he died in my parents' living room, surrounded by our family. A couple of weeks later, though, I was making this long, lonely drive from my mom's house. It became my mom's house then one evening when grief just overcame me. I was just, as I drove these deserted roads through the countryside, I started sobbing and I was screaming. I was in emotional pain. I was holding on to the steering wheel, and it was that kind of ugly, snot filled, crying, gut wrenching grief, kind of a breakdown. And I was shouting at my angels because grief is a lot of anger. It's a lot of different emotions. That's all involved. So I'm shouting and I'm hanging onto the steering wheel. And I'm like, please give me a sign that my father is really okay. Why did he have to go? Please give me a sign. And I'm doing that all the way home. So I was just drained when I finally got home, of course. And I quickly completed everything that I had to do that night, my nightly routine, and we laid down to go to sleep. So at that time, we had these touch lamps next to the side of the bed. And I snuggled under the covers and I touched the lamp to turn it off and I rolled over. Suddenly, the light came back on again. This lamp just popped back on. And I thought, that's kind of annoying and surprising because it's never done that before, but it must be a malfunction with the light. So I touched it again, it went off, and I rolled over and it came back on. So one more time, I was like determined now and not thinking about anything else but this lamp malfunctioning. I touched it again and it turned off. And I thought, okay, that's it. Now it's off. Then all of a sudden, the radio in the bathroom that was connected to the bedroom started playing. And something told me to really pay attention to the words. So as I listened, I heard these words, and it's a George Strait song called Love Without End, Amen. But these were the words playing right then. Last night I dreamed I died and stood outside those pearly gates when suddenly I realized there must be some mistake. If they know half the things I've done, they'll never let me in. And then somewhere from the other side, I heard these words again. And this is a part of the chorus that stood out to me. You see, daddies don't just love their children every now and then. It's a love without end. Amen. And
Wow.
words coming out of my bathroom on the radio.
Wow.
And I just knew that was my dad because he was some kind of a hell-raising musician, when he was young. And I think part of the reason that he was a little fearful of death is that he thought they're never going to let me in those pearly gates. It's such a hellraiser. So all that fit together so perfectly. And it was just so comforting.
Wow, that's amazing. What a story. This story involves me and my best friend Brian. I mentioned him before. We would, all of this in my spiritual journey kind of not just started with him, but he helped. He was one of the first person that liked to have these conversations with me when I was like 16, 17 years old. So we'd be up late at night. We would just be talking late into the night because we're both night owls. He wasn't a good sleeper. I just like staying up at night. So we'd always be talking about UFOs and aliens and, conspiracy theories. And, we would just like kind of like explore what was out there and dissect and pick things apart and really kind of like articulate or talk about our feelings of how we thought about things, kind of what we do, but back then, like it was such a small little bits of information compared to how much you can get with research now, right? So we're hanging out one night, we're watching TV, and somehow we don't know. We left the room and we came back, and it was on a channel, and we never saw this channel before. And it's going into a documentary, and the documentary's on a large UFO sighting that was witnessed by like all these school children in Africa. I forget where exactly it was, but it's a pretty major story. It happened in the 90s where a bunch of school kids saw UFO land, and a bunch of the kids said the creature talked with its eyes and communicated telepathically that the world is kind of like coming to an end. We're destroying it. Like humans need to kind of change their tune and like change directions and start taking better care of themselves and the earth. And well, the interesting thing about this story was like it was just like something we never heard of, and it was like mind blowing for us to hear this. A Harvard scientist actually went over there and he had all the kids draw pictures of what they saw. And all the kids pretty much had the same figure with the same ship. They all said that the creature talked with its eyes to them. And there was a big backlash in the country of like friends and relatives and the teachers trying to just say this didn't happen, it wasn't real. A lot of these kids kind of like buried these memories and tried to pretend like it was real. Some grew up and said it didn't happen because they were gaslighting themselves into believing it. Anyway, so we're watching this documentary and we're like, whoa. It was kind of like mind blowing that something like this was documented and there were so many witnesses to it. So as this is happening, we're like watching this and like looking at each other, mouths agape, like what is going on? Like what show is this? We didn't even know what show it was. It was just so strange. The whole house starts vibrating, the entire house. And it's not like a tremor or an earthquake. It felt like something was like tuning into the resonance of the house and making the whole thing shake. And we're looking at each other like, what the hell is going on? So we go to like the front door. Like for some reason, we intuitively both like ran to his front door, and my friend Brian was obsessed with keeping the door locked. I remember like multiple times a night he would go just to double check it, almost like a slight OCD thing, to make sure the screen door was locked, the front door was locked. He would like open it and lock it again to make sure it was locked. Multiple times a night, every night he did that. We hung out. We get there 2, 3 in the morning, right? We get in the hallway. The door is just wide open with the screen door wide open. So he freaked out, slammed the door shut. His mom was sleeping upstairs, who was a heavy sleeper. She comes out of her room and goes, Brian, why is the house vibrating? So it's like it happened to us. It was so crazy. We've been talking about it for like 20 plus years. We can't really explain it, but it happened. And we have his mom, who was a sleeping witness, woke up and asked us why the house was vibrating. So it wasn't just like this hallucination or story we made up. His mom was there and she witnessed it. So I still don't really know what happened that night. It felt like something maybe was trying to contact us, and it opened the door for us to go outside. But at that point, we were too freaked out. I'm like, I'm not going outside. What if I just get sucked up and I'm gone somewhere? Yeah, that's the story of I guess the UFO encounter. I don't even know what to call that, but it was really odd.
Wow, that is crazy.
Yeah.
And that story's on a documentary now that Steven Spielberg produced. I think it's on Netflix, and that whole story is on there. So that's
Yeah, it shows the kids like modern day, and like it talks about them back then. But like we never heard of it. We never heard of it until that time. And this is probably back in like 2004, 2005. And
Wow.
the encounter, I think, happened in the early 90s, but it wasn't like a big major news story that came out. So it was wild. Yeah.
That is very cool.
Yeah.
Those are the stories that we all have where this is gross to compare to that, but I call it picking a scab
Mm,
because you go back and you kind of pick at that scab and you're like, will I see something different here now? Will this feel different? Or can I find out something about what causes a little emotional injury? But you never do. You go
right.
back and you examine it from every angle and it's all the same.
Right, right. It was just that unexplained. We didn't see anything. We didn't feel anything except the vibrations. And it was just like similar to your father's story. It was like synchronistic with the electronics, right? Like the radio said, went on the other room and said exactly what he wanted to say to you. Like the TV went to this channel in this documentary. We don't know how it happened to communicate this information right before the house started vibrating. Almost like it waited for like that documentary to be over or like it was wrapping up with the credits, the whole house is shaking.
There's
So
information here. There's
it's like
information for you to pick up and
something wanted us to see that just so they could be like, hello, wake up, you know?
wow. Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, here's one of my stories that is the same way. Like I kind of go back over it again and I kind of think about what could have caused it. It's only one of many of these stories that I have. But at one point, we lived in the Northeast and I was a realtor working out of a two-story office. So one Sunday, I had to go into the office to complete some paperwork, and I noticed that no one at the office had arrived. There were no cars in the parking lot. So I drove around back to use the back entrance because it's closest to where my desk was located.
Hmm.
So I'm sitting at my desk, I'm doing my paperwork, and then I begin to hear movement upstairs, and thinking to myself, somebody must have come in. And then this movement gets louder, and eventually it's footsteps, and then they turn into pounding footsteps. And there's a long hallway over my head on this other floor. And finally, it turns into outright heavy running. And I can hear this running, like somebody running up and down this hallway, just pounding. And I can hear these footsteps. It's making the ceiling vibrate.
Wow.
It's stomping so quickly and so loudly from one point to another. And it was so loud that I was thinking, what in the world is someone thinking up there? Like, is that a really big person? Like, how are they making that noise? Are there like 10 kids running up and down? Like, what is going on with this? And so it was still happening and I was still noticing it and I was becoming a little uneasy with it as I gathered my things together and I went out the back door to my car. So as I drove around the building, now I'm all fired up because I'm like, that's ridiculous. What if I had clients down here or something? I look around to the front of the building and I'm all prepared to determine who was in there at the time. There's not a single car in the parking lot. So I stop my car and I look up and the whole second story is dark. It's like it was when I first came in. And there's absolutely no evidence of anybody ever having been in that building except me.
Wow.
The rest of the building was totally dark and deserted.
Did you ever find out if there was a spirit, any other sightings by other people you worked with there?
Well, one of the agents that worked upstairs, he had crossed over recently and he was pretty young. But on the other hand, I think in some public buildings, when there's a lot of emotion that goes on, like the emotion that comes from real estate transactions, I think that energy can kind of build up and create kind of an energy of its own. So, this is after years of thinking about that. And so I thought either it was him kind of being angry it was kind of him being angry because he crossed over at a certain age, maybe. I mean, these are just my speculations, or maybe it was just some energy that I don't know. But
Hmm.
anyway, I've never figured it out. But I'll never forget the shock that I had just staring at that building being so dark and having nobody else there but me.
That's freaky. Well, that kind of reminds me of another story of mine. This is another quick one. I don't have such elaborate stories as you, except that UFO one. But what we, as people have known, if you see my other episodes, I grew up into a town with abandoned psychiatric center, and there was a lot of just wild activity there. It was just an interesting town. But this one memory, we went to this bar, and it's actually like it's tucked in the corner of this town that I live in, but it's on the property of the psychiatric center. Like it's on this bar, there's like a two-lane road, and then right across the street is all the buildings. So it's a big towny bar. Everybody goes there. Me and my friends went there once again, another encounter with my friend Brian, and we're hanging out with somebody else from another town, and Brian was always like big into like exploring like the psychiatric center, and that's what our town was known for. It was abandoned. Everybody from everywhere liked to go urban exploring and checking out the buildings and looking around at like what the decay of what that building would look like. So we decided to go to the closest building, and we were walking there at night, and we're talking, and all of a sudden, like we're having a conversation. I forgot even what the conversation was about, and we hear a voice from inside the building just say something like filling in the gap of the conversation. And we just all stopped and kind of looked at each other. The lights weren't on in there. Granted, there could have been squatters in there, but it just felt very eerie that we were having this conversation, and then like a fourth voice just comes in and just like interjects. We all kind of just stopped, looked at each other, didn't say a word, and kind of just turned around, noped out of there, and just walked away and didn't even talk about it. We're like, yeah, today's not the night that we're going to go inside this creepy building where there's an unknown voice dwelling inside there, not necessarily a ghost story, but it didn't seem like a human voice that was interacting with us. That's what was so eerie about it. It felt like a very confident presence. Like the vibe, I kind of felt like it wanted us to go in there. So when I feel like an energy like that, I'm like, no, I'm walking away. We're going home for the night. We're just gonna pretend this didn't happen.
So what do you think it was?
I don't know, looking back on it, I think in the moment we were just shocked that something responded. It could have been a squatter. It could have been somebody in there, but at the same time, it could have been something else. I'm not really sure.
That's a creepy story.
It's just a creepy story.
But on the other hand, if you were ghost hunters, you'd be going right in there. You'd be all, hyped up about it and be like, let's figure this out. So
Well,
it's the
yeah.
perspective like we talk about.
Yeah, the thing, I guess, bridging off that story, there was something that I noticed when I was a kid. Like, you, now as a medium, when we look into people's eyes, we can tell a lot just by first impressions, looking at their eyes and feeling their vibe. There was always this vibe of certain people that I grew up with, where there was a certain level of like clinical insanity or something inside of them, and it felt like this. I can't prove it or anything, but almost like the pain of those ghosts seeped into certain people or chose certain ones to kind of latch or attach onto, and they would get this like blank look in their eyes, almost like they were possessed, but like part of like the consciousness of that energy. So I don't know what it is. It's like something strange, but like certain kids growing up, like you just look at them in the eyes and they just like looked empty. It didn't look like they were like there, but they were doing rebellious things. They were being a bully. They were getting off on like hurting people. You know what I mean? So I don't know if that was just paranormal experience of living in that town, or these were just like, particularly mentally ill individuals, or a combination of the both. But like it is, looking back on it, it always felt like the energy of the town was trying to like keep that darkness perpetuating, and it was trying to snuff out. Knowing what I know now, maybe it was some sort of, I don't know what to call it, like collective energy that was trying to snuff out my energy or trying to lower my vibration because it was naturally going to elevate or something to that effect.
Right. And you said the word possession, but I don't think that that would happen like you and I have talked about. I think that like attracts like, and so an energy would align with another energy that would be similar, so that if
Okay.
somebody needed to be mean, then that mean energy would be like, oh, I can amplify that a little bit.
That's kind of, that makes sense. That would make more sense. Absolutely.
I think we feel that sometimes. I think you and I both have talked about that, where we will walk into a room and meet someone, and it's almost like being repelled by that energy. It's so opposite our energy, and we don't want to become involved in it, and we don't want it to kind of rub up against us. And I know we talk about that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I have another story, and it's about my mom. Um, in 2005, she crossed over, and very shortly after that, I moved out and began living on my own. I was going through a divorce, so I bought a house and I started living there. And shortly after I had moved in the middle of the night, my television started turning on by itself. And so that's a little unnerving at 2 o'clock in the morning to suddenly have your television in the living room coming on. And it happened a couple of nights in a row. And for some reason, I just thought, this must be my mom. I wasn't afraid of it, but it was unusual and it was a new house. So a little bit of time went by, maybe a week or two, and I'm still having this kind of unusual thing going on. But I dreamed about my mom one night, and we were sitting at a table and we were drinking coffee. And the first thing I noticed was the stream was so crystal clear. I could see everything. It was like being there. And the second thing I found myself thinking is, wow, I haven't seen that shirt since I was a kid in California with my mom. So I
Wow.
didn't even remember that shirt. And it was kind of cool remembering it. There was such a familiarity about the whole thing.
Hmm.
And then my mom looked at me across the table and said very seriously, am I dead? And in my dream, I thought, okay, how do I break this to her? I'm having a whole conversation with myself. How do you tell somebody that? Do I come just right out and tell her that? Or am I
I'm
going to be the
surprised. I'm surprised you didn't think, "Am I dead too?"
So I said to my mom, yes, you're dead. And she was like, okay. And then all of a sudden I woke up.
Wow.
So the next day I get a call from my sister. And my sister goes, I had a dream about mom.
Wow.
What did you dream? And she said, well, she came to me in a dream and she asked me if she was dead. And I said, what did you tell her? And she said, oh, I told her she was dead. So that our dreams, without even knowing about it, she had no idea about my dream. I had no idea about her dream, and it
Wow.
coincided.
Yes, Mom, you're dead. Wow, what that's amazing. I love hearing stuff like that. That seems to be a common thing too with these types of stories. Like if there's another sibling or family member involved, like the visitation happens on the same night and same type of dream. And it's almost like it comes up in casual conversation too, right? Like, oh man, I had such a weird dream about mom last night. And you're like, oh my God, I did too. It's like one of those things.
Mhm.
Wow.
What's your next story?
So my next story, I have kind of like quick stories of just weird things happening. This one happened with my friend Bill. I think we were hanging out in my parents' basement probably about 12, 14 years ago. And once again, we're having like one of these supernatural conversations. We're talking about energy work and like Freemasonry and ghosts and UFOs and aliens and all that stuff. And we're both playing pool. My parents had a pool table back then. So we're both taking shots and we're having a conversation. At one point, me and him just like I think we got like emotion not a heated, but like emotionally engaged, and we were just kind of in the flow of this conversation going back and forth. We're both holding our pool cues up like this, and all of a sudden, one of the balls on the pool table just rolls and hits into the other one. And we heard it go, like we heard it and it smacked the three other balls. It made that sound and it split. And me and him just like looked down, we're holding the sticks, looked at each other, and we're like, did you, what, how did this, like, what, what, like it was just one of those things like you stop and you're like, there was a glitch in the matrix here. But something rolled that ball and made it smack into the other balls. So little weird things like that happened to me over my life, and I sometimes some of them, a lot of them, I probably forgot just because it's just so quick, and I'm like, huh, that's weird. I take note of it, but then I keep moving through my day. That was one of those things too, where I was like, there's no way that pool ball could have moved. There's no way. There was no tremors. We both had the pool cues. We were the only ones around the table at that time. So just strange.
Especially with that energy and that force, like for it to hit hard enough.
It felt like it was like a medium shot, like somebody had enough force to propel it in to knock two balls, which knocked into two more balls. That was like like that sound when all the balls hit each other, and it was just very odd. We just kind of had to stop. We put the pool cues down slowly, and then just went upstairs. Like
That's such an interesting story. And we hear a lot of mediums tell stories like that. And that's the kind of thing you do go back and you pick at that scab and you're like, well, how did that happen? Let me analyze this again. Let me look all around that ball. Let me put myself back in that situation. You know, what went on?
Well, it's one thing like where you have a dream that's really weird and you connect that to like somebody else that had the same dream. Those that story and the UF story by friend Brian, like those were like psychokinetic things that were happening in the physical. Those were not just hallucinations. Those were not just like, our imaginations running wild. That wasn't us just like saying, "Hey, let's make up this crazy story and try to convince people that this happened to us." Like we're pretty honest people. Like I don't just go off the cuff and make things up like that. So that's the really interesting part. It seems like reality when the physical reality does things you can't explain, like that TV turning on, that radio playing that song at the perfect synchronistic moment. That stuff you can't explain. That's definitely spirit working through the physical environment, right?
Right. That's so true.
Yeah. So how about you, Z? Any other stories?
Oh, I'm like you. I have so many. And this is what led us both to become psychic mediums the way that we are.
Hmm.
So I have a very embarrassing story to me, for me, and I'm glad that a lot of time has gone by because this is absolutely true. You can't make this up. And I've alluded to it in some of the other podcasts that we've done. So I'm living in Phoenix, Arizona, and I decided to take this data entry job that you go into this old hospital at night and you sit down at a desk and you're typing. So this is an old Native American hospital. I have the key when I get hired, and they hand me this little button that's like in a little box. And they're like, because this is in a really bad area of Phoenix. They're like, if anything happens, all you have to do is push this red button and the police will come. So I'm like, okay, no problem. I'll just do this. So it's evening and I've been going in there and I've begun to hear things in this building, and I've begun to hear walking, doors closing, all kinds of things like that. And I'm young, so I've begun to just sort of self-medicate with a little bit of pot because I'm like, I can't handle this. This is weird. Like I can't even
Wouldn't
go.
that wouldn't that make you more paranoid though?
Oh, seriously. And then I'm like, okay, I can't do that either because that's just wrong. So I'm going to stop doing that. I'm just going to go face my fears. So I go in there one night and I'm typing away. And I mean, it's all out as though I'm in the middle of a building that is occupied and running as a full business. I can hear walking in the room where the microwave is. I can hear doors opening and closing. I can hear walking down the hallway. I can hear walking around me now. Like it's just all coming around me.
Wow.
And so I can't take it any longer. I push the red button and the phone rings, and it's a 911 dispatcher. And she's like, are you okay? We have the police coming. They're on the way. And I'm like, I think somebody's broken in here. And I'm really hearing it. Like I'm hearing it as though that's happening. And it's so real. I'm not hallucinating, and I know I'm not, and I'm not high because that only happened a couple times when I thought I couldn't handle it. So I'm on the phone with her and she's like, okay, just stay on the phone. We have the police on the way. They're coming. Now I'm hearing voices a little bit in the background from down the hallway, and I'm convinced somebody's opened a window and come in. So then she says to me, all right, I want you to go to the door. There's a police officer there. You'll hear him knocking. And I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to hear him knocking with all this other knocking and all these other noises going on? But she says, go on to the door and he'll come out, escort you out. So I go over to the door. I put the phone down. I go over to the door, and there, sure enough, is a police officer there. So I unlock the door and I step out, and there is a circle of police cars with lights flashing, people behind their doors with their guns drawn, and all these police officers as far as I could see. And they're all there because I pushed this button because I was hearing all these ghosts inside this building. And I have to say, it was mortifying. It was just mortifying to have that happen, to have the consequences of that in front of me. And they searched the building. And of course, there was nobody there. It was just
Wow. So they're like, we got another paranoid pothead late at night, just hearing things. How much tax dollars did you waste that day, Z?
I know. Believe me, that's occurred to me. And I didn't go back. I just quit. I was like, I can't take this. And I'm not sure they hired anybody for that position after I left either. So I'm not,
Wow.
maybe they were already hearing things and they already knew about that paranormal stuff. And they were just hoping that I was just going to ignore it and survive.
I wonder if you're not the first person that's had to, and they had to keep hiring people to send back there,
I
right?
know. I sincerely hope I'm not the first person who pushed that button.
So what did the cops say? Were they like kind of mean? Were they like making you feel like an idiot? No.
No, they were very nice about it. And they were like,
Yeah.
okay, everything's fine. That's cool. And like I said, they swept the building. They went all around. They didn't find anything, but they were really nice about it.
Wow. Cool story.
Oh,
Embarrassing, but cool.
totally. I don't really tell that story out loud. But
Well,
what about you?
well, you had I just had like once again one of these small things that happened to me. You mentioned like the creaks and the footsteps, right? That's something that always felt like there was a presence in my childhood house growing up in that town with the psychiatric center. And there were certain floorboards you could tell like who was walking in the house by certain floorboards creaking, you know? So my dad had like heavier steps. You'd hear him go up the stairs. There's this certain like, I don't know what to call it, but like you walk up 3 steps and you turn and you go up like another flight. So like there's like 3 steps on the, and then there's a turn that you go up the rest of the stairway. So when you got onto those 3 steps, there'd be like two boards that would like creak a certain way, be like, right? A lot of times, like I know it's an old house and floorboards move and stuff like that. But when I felt like something, I knew that I could hear the floorboards creaking when no one was in the house, or if it was late at night and no one was walking around, it would just like feel like there were steps moving on those floorboards, and they were sensitive. Like a 2-year old could step on the same floorboard as a fully grown adult, and it would make the same creaking sound. Any type of like shift of pressure, it didn't really move with like the wind or the groans of the house. So that always kind of freaked me out because it would just like out of nowhere, the middle floorboard out of nowhere would just like feel like it had pressure on it. Where like in the middle of the hallway, I'd know like what that one sounded like, and it would be like, "Wah," and I'm like, I would stop and be like, oh no, you know what I mean? It was just one of those things, but I haven't really experienced that since. You know, that was always in that house, but that was 200 yards from that psychiatric center. So I feel like that, like you said a while ago, that house was probably like Grand Central Station for spirits coming in, coming out all the time. And that's what it felt like. It was like sometimes it would have like an eerie feeling to this presence. Sometimes it would feel like I felt like something was there, but it wasn't threatening, you know? It really depended on the day and the time, I guess.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know how you grew up around that. That energy coming in and out would be very disconcerting.
No choice. Another thing that happened, I'll go into another story real quick. I was telling you about this before I came on because I was looking up the name of this thing that I saw, or what I thought I saw. I must have been like 3 or 4 years old. And I used to be terrified to go to sleep and I hated the dark. You know, like my mom would come in every once in a while. She read in like a magazine that if you go in and spray Lysol and tell your kid it's the monster repellent spray, they'll feel better and they'll go back to bed. So every once in a while, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and say monsters or whatever. My mom would come in and spray some Lysol and be like, oh, the monsters are gone. I sprayed them away, you know. But this one, I think what started me doing that and having all those like nightly like encounters where I thought I was seeing something started when I was like 3 or 4 years old. I remember getting out of bed, and my bed at that time did not have like there was no underneath. There were drawers underneath that bed. It was solid wood. There's nothing underneath there. So I remember getting out of my bed, going out of my door, looking back at the bed, and it almost looked like some like creature. It almost like looked like Spider-Man outfit, like without the colors, like a gray like mask with like these slanted eyes, kind of like pulled himself out from under the bed and kind of like stretched his back and neck up. And it looked like he had like almost like spider legs or tentacles out there. So like that was a weird thing that always kind of like I was always processing as a kid into my adult and teenage years. Like, was this a real encounter? Was this a dream from something I saw? Like, was it my imagination running wild? But then I was actually on Reddit a while back looking up in supernatural encounters, and somebody put up a picture of this thing, which I'll actually put up now. It's really freaky looking. I know that the name that I found, I couldn't find the name of what they call it. There's like a westernized name, but in Japan they call it Jorogumo. It's almost like a spider-like creature with a humanoid body. So it looked like a humanoid, half spider, half human entity. I don't know what else to call it. And looking back, I think my memory put that lens of fear on it, thinking it was this scary thing to be scared, fearful of. But it never happened again. I didn't feel threatened. I think I was just shocked by seeing this thing. And I don't really know what it wanted, what it was there for, but I even thinking back now, I could clearly see the memory of like what it looked like and how it looked at me. Almost like it felt like it was looking at me like I was like prey or a piece of meat, but it didn't do anything. So I don't know. It was a very confusing childhood memory, but I remember that specifically because my memory is like a steel trap with certain things.
Yeah, that's interesting because what other filter would, I mean, you could have been curious, but as a child and being afraid of monsters under the bed and in the dark, that makes
Yeah,
sense. You would have been looking through that filter of fear.
right. Under the bed. Yeah, under the bed. And there was no under the bed. That's what the weird part was. It was almost like it crawled through like the crack where the bed like was on the floor and it just like pulled itself out of some portal or something to that effect.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you remember that old, really old show called The Twilight Zone?
Yeah.
I mean, that almost ruined me as a child, as an empath, and as somebody who is connected like you are. Uh, Having that come in, I'm going to compare that to the energy coming in from your living near that psychiatric facility. Once you turn the TV on and all that weird, scary shit was coming in from the Twilight Zone, it's like opening that door.
Like a
And
magnet.
yeah, you've got all that energy coming in. That's one of the reasons that if you think your kids are empaths or if you have gifts or anything like that, that's why we're saying don't watch those shows. Don't let that energy in
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it can just scare the crap out of you.
Yeah. It's like you're right. You're opening the door. It's like magnetizing that fear that I think that's the kind of thing going back to that Hollywood stuff we were talking about. There's like this helplessness of the fear overcoming, and there's nothing you could do and you're powerless. And that's like one of the biggest human fears that we have, right? Being tortured or being tormented and being able to do nothing about it and having to just take it. So I think a lot of Hollywood plays into that like carnal fear or like primal fear in humans. Like he's coming to get you. You could run all you want. You could kick and scream, but you're still going to get like tortured and hurt in the end while you're running for your life and fear for it. So it kind of like really drives home that perpetuation of like running around. Like look at the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the first one. I mean, it's
Oh,
it's like it's poorly made for those standards because it was like, an independent film. It didn't have a lot of budget. But the fact that half the movie is her running from the guy thinking she's safe, and then he breaks through the window or he breaks through the wall and she gets all bloody and she runs away and she thinks she's safe again. And then she thinks she escaped, but then she's in the vehicle, then they bring her back to the farm. It's like one of those things where you think you're finally out and you're just like keeping being like trauma bombed and sucked back in. So that's the engagement. So I guess my point with all that is to say like Hollywood wants you to be in that perpetually engaged fear, for some reason. You
because it
can't let
doesn't say movies otherwise.
right, exactly.
It's the hype.
It's the hype. It's like the thrill of fear, like riding a roller coaster. Like it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, but you're still scared, waiting for it.
Mhm. Yeah, I know. All right, I have another story associated with real estate. And this is one day that I went to go and do an open house. It's a Sunday afternoon. It's really nice outside, and I'm going to do this open house. And these houses are all built with a river or a creek like running down below them. And very often, I think you have supernatural energy associated with water because I think it
Mhm.
brings up that energy. But anyway, I
It's
mean, it's
sorry,
beautiful.
I didn't mean to
Um,
cut you off. Yeah, the water or streams moving underground, it's current, it's a current.
yes,
So
it's
the
flowing.
frequencies pull in and spirit pulls spiritual energy through the water, right?
Yep, yep. So I'm in this beautiful two-story house. I brought my daughter with me, and the one who also is very tuned in, and now she's a psychic medium. She just doesn't work as one. So we're in the house, and I do the open house, and the whole time I'm doing it, it sounds like there are footsteps walking, those typical footsteps that'll drive you crazy. And then it's doors are, I'm closing a door and I'll come back and it's open. When I'll go over here and I'll close another door and it will open. But we're sitting there, we're talking and we're just having a good open house, but nobody really came in but the time went by quickly because I was with my daughter. Still, I'm having these things happening and they're making me a little uneasy. So we get to the end of the open house, and this is a picky builder who had built this whole development. So I'm like, I'm going to have to go and turn off all the lights in this house and make sure
Mhm.
everything is secured because he'll have an issue with it if I don't. So I go to every bedroom, I go in every bathroom, I'm going in every room and turning all these lights off, making sure all of that's secure, make sure the back door is secure. Nobody's in here. We're all by ourselves. And my daughter and I are walking around together, and I can tell she's uneasy also. So we go out the front door. I lock the front door. We go and get in the car, and she and I look up, and the lights are on in the house again. So my daughter's like, Mom, are you going back in there and turn those lights off? And I'm like, no, no, I'm not. I am going home. They can stay on.
Something with you and the electronics, huh?
It's always so shocking when something like that happens. You don't expect to see it, so it takes you a few minutes to absorb the whole what would have had to happen in there for those lights all to be back on again.
Wow.
How
Well,
about you? What's your next
uh,
story?
I got one more story that really was significant because I think it was about 2016, 2017, I want to say. Yeah. Me and my wife took a cross-country trip at this point. So we went all the way down the East Coast. We went across, the United States and came back like on the north side, going all the way over. But on this part of the journey, we were staying at a Airbnb in New Orleans. And never been to New Orleans before, but as an empath, I was aware as an empath at the time, but I was not really super in tune with my gifts yet. But New Orleans is kind of a creepy vibe town. It's got a lot of mysterious, supernatural stuff going on there. We took a walking ghost tour. We were only there for the one night or the one day. We took a walking ghost tour. One of the stories that stuck out to kind of like sum up like how they think that it's like haunted or supernatural is when they first developed it. I forget if it was like a Spanish or a French priest had like the first church that was built in the main square there. And he was like one of the only ones around. It was like a new colony, and the city was just being built, but he was staying in the church. And late at one night, it almost sounded like he said like it sounded like the swamp was like right outside the church, like the water just receded up. The bird the frogs were loud, the crickets were loud. It sounded like the water was like right outside, and then when he goes outside, there was nothing there. So they think I don't know if there's like an Indian burial ground there, or I think it was Native American land, but there's something going on supernaturally natural with that land. Um, so one of the main stories that stuck out on the Walking Ghost tour was a story about a young girl that married a gambler. And I think he was from a good family, and he just had money to burn. So he was always up drinking every night. He was gambling, playing poker with his buddies or playing cards. And she kept begging him for months, like, come home, spend some time with me. She was getting like melancholy. She was getting depressed, and he wouldn't spend time with her. So I think like on one specific night, she went to go find him and was like, come back up with me. And he was kind of like, I'll be there in a minute. And he never came back up. She she jumped to her death and committed suicide because she was so like upset that she wasn't getting the attention, something to that effect. So I don't know why that story kind of resonated with me. And he showed us the building that she was on where she jumped from. And he was playing cards on the building across the street on the first floor. And they all saw her jump to her death while he was there playing cards. So it was like kind of one of those traumatic love, old stories where like it just like kind of resonates with you. So that night I'm going to sleep. I feel like I'm in a dream. I'm on top of a flat rooftop that looked very similar to where that woman jumped from. I start approaching a figure. It's a woman in a dress. I can tell it's a female figure wearing like a white like gown, flowing hair in the wind, flowy like white, like kind of like ethereal, like ghostly energy. I start approaching her, and like before I get like 3 feet from her, she turns around. I see this almost like decayed, gross, like skull of a face, and she screams in my face, "Get out!" Like in a shrill type of high-pitched voice. And at that moment, I woke up. I forgot where I was. I realized I was in an Airbnb in New Orleans. I slept the next couple hours. We got up, we left, we didn't explore that city again. Like that was it. But that one was really, it felt like the ghost was telling me I'm not welcome there. That's what it kind of felt like. Like, get out. You shouldn't be here. Just leave.
That's so interesting because how many people had she actually done that to who'd never even noticed that or just dismissed it? But then she picks on a psychic medium who's going to get the full message all
Right.
around. That's really interesting.
And I felt like engaged with the story. So maybe like my interest and like attention going to that story and being in the vicinity gave her the hook to kind of visit me when I was sleeping, right?
Wow, that's so, yeah, I know we've all had those sort of experiences that you're talking about. And you wake up and you're like, did that happen? Is that real? But it has a different feeling. It has a different feeling of energy.
I woke up that night. I felt like I was like sweating. I felt pale. I felt like I knew that like was a dream that was like one of those dreams that you're like, that was not just a dream. That was something else. Cause I couldn't sleep the rest of that night. I couldn't. It was just I was just thinking about it and just terrified. So I did what anybody else does these days. I just scrolled on my phone until the sun came up and we packed up and we got out of there. So
That's so interesting. And other people wouldn't have done that either, but you heeded the warning.
yeah,
Like you
yeah,
respected her wishes.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So what
Wow.
about you? Any more stories?
I do. I know you have tons of them and I do too. And this is a short one, but we at one time lived in Selma, Alabama. And my sister and I used to go over to Cahaba, which is a really cool place. It's an abandoned town. It's at the intersection of two rivers. So every time it rains really hard, those rivers flood. But you can still walk around there and see where the houses were. You can see where the basements were. You can see the cemeteries. It's just a really cool kind of ghost town experience without having the houses there. And it's purported to be haunted, and people will go in there, and right as in the evening, they'll hear children who are talking or playing, but there's no children there. There's nothing there.
Mhm.
So we had explored Cahaba. We went all around. We had some kind of weird kind of experiences. It felt like we weren't alone. And so somebody told us about the kids that would play there. And I was like, I don't know. People are going to say scary things. And this was way before I got into psychic mediumship. So I came home that night and I was determined to write at the time. I was writing a lot. And so I was writing a story and someone had sent me a part of a poem. So there's that. But I had talked to my sister and I was like, I don't know about all that stuff at Cobb. I just think that's kind of silly. I had just kind of dismissed it. So we got off the phone and I'm working on my stories. And then all of a sudden the computer printer starts just printing something out. And there's paper flying out of this printer, one page at a time, over and over again. And so I'm like, what the flippity flippers? So I go and plug it and I turn it over and I look, and it's one line from a poem that somebody had shared with me. And that one line said, grown-ups can be so disbelieving. And I was like, oh my. So I called my sister and I said, this is really interesting. And she said, this is even more interesting. I've been hearing children outside my house since we got back from
Wow.
visiting Ghost Town.
Wow. You brought something back with you.
I think it was yeah. And I think it was trying to communicate. I don't think it was anything bad. I think maybe there were kids there. There were a lot of families there.
Hmm.
It never frightened me and it never did anything that I would be worried about. And even now, it's kind of a fond memory of having a visit with these children who decided to make themselves known.
Wow. Cool. So I think I'm out of stories. We have one shared story that we could talk about.
Oh, yes. Yep. So we all have our meetings at Beach Dreams once a week. We have some psychic mediums that we meet with. We have a really good group that Dan has put together called the Tribe. We have such good energy and everybody's so in tune. And so for a little period of time, we were going down to Beach Dreams and we felt like someone was there. And we could just sort of see him, we could hear him. We knew that somebody was walking around and there were cold spots. So one night, Dan came in with his wife to open up the shop for our meeting. And
So yeah, we knew there was a presence there. We always kind of felt a weird energy when we went to like the back hallway by the bathrooms, or if you went like behind the counter where the sinks in the kitchen was, there was always a weird energy. One day, actually, this is the day where this thing happened. I come in early. I go sit like at the table I usually sit, which is kind of like in the back corner. It's kind of got that like eerie feeling to it. And I'm sitting there, I'm pulling cards to myself. Then our friend Jess comes in. Jess is our barista for us, so she makes our coffee. She comes in, she goes around the corner. She must be cleaning up. She's playing with the sink. She's just trying to get some stuff ready, getting the equipment ready or whatever. And I feel like a strong wind like blow by me on my left side, and it felt like a presence. And then like 2 seconds later, Jess rounds the corner and she goes, "Were you just back here? Did you just touch me?" I was like, "That's so weird." I was just gonna say because something felt like it brushed by me and I thought you were right around my shoulder, and she felt the same feeling on the opposite side of the store. So we're like, "That's weird." And she's like, "I know there's a ghost here." She used to work there. She's like, "I know there's a ghost here. There definitely has to be, you know." So probably about like half hour later, everybody starts arriving. My wife comes in because she takes her own car coming from work after. And we're talking, we're kind of catching up, we're joking, we have our fun little banter every time we all come in. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, two beans just drop out of the coffee dispenser that Mary keeps filled. She has these little coffee bean dispensers where you could turn the dial, almost like one of those old like machines you get like gumballs out of or something like that. So all of a sudden, no movement. Nobody was near it. Two beans just drop out loudly from the top shelf, hit the counter, fall on the floor. We all just kind of look at each other like, what was that? Right. So it felt a little odd. And then I think it was about a week later, Mary, the shop's owner, was in before we had our meeting, and Z just decided to ask, is there a spirit of male presence here? We've been feeling it in our circle. There's been some odd things going on. And she just goes, matter of fact, "Oh yeah, that's Angus," like out of nowhere. And we're like, "Who's Angus?" You know? So what happens is she's talking about Angus. Angus, I think, was in the Air Force. He had some sort of higher government knowledge, but he was almost like one of these Renaissance men. Like she had like actually like right where Z sits every time, right behind her is a shelf with like Angus's stuff. So there's like a really detailed picture of like the waterway of the intercoastal waterway that like is beautiful, drawn by hand by Angus. Angus was big into like flight and like I think boating and like spaceships and air travel. He was a very smart like engineering based scientist person. And he would always get upset with Mary, the owner. I think he started to develop dementia. So in his later years, his wife would kind of drop him off at the coffee shop and he'd kind of just be there all day talking to people, drinking his coffee because it kept him busy. And I think he was driving his wife a little bit crazy with everything that was going on. But the coffee shop seemed to be like his comfort zone, his comfort space, and he'd feel better going there every day. So he would get upset with Mary all the time because she would call the coffee beans, but Angus, being so technical driven, would say, they're not beans, they're seeds, they're seeds. And he'd be adamant about that and be like, they're not coffee beans, they're seeds. And he'd tell that to anybody else that came into the store that called them coffee beans. So Mary actually had a special batch roasted in his honor after he passed, and the batch of coffee beans were called seeds. And the seeds container was where the two beans that fell out from to get our attention to bring this whole thing up for our group. So it was crazy how we all started having these experiences. We were kind of talking about the sensations of feeling Angus's energy. And then Mary confirmed that the beans that seemed to fall out of the container were the ones that were named after Angus in honor of him, calling them seeds. So I think we've talked about this kind of in detail ever since then. There was no like malevolence or like anger or any type of bad vibes from Angus. I think it was one of those people in life and death. He just wanted to be acknowledged for his presence and he wanted to be known that he was in the room. So that was his way of getting our attention to start this conversation. And now we kind of like, he's not as strong when we do our work there, but we know he's around and he's kind of like a benevolent spirit that's kind of watching and protecting the circle in our eyes.
Right. And you'll know when he's there too, because I didn't realize the bench I was sitting on, we call it Angus's like memorial wall. So it was behind us where we were sitting. And if I was sitting there, I would get so cold. It was ice cold. And then we realized that was just Angus's energy. He was kind of squeezing in there to sit with
Mhm.
on that bench, and he'll still do it because Jess will get really cold on one side, and when somebody comes in and they're like, oh, feel my arm, it's freezing, we just kind of chuckle to ourselves because we know what's going on. We know Angus is taking his rightful place in our tribe on that bench underneath all of the memorabilia that Mary has put above that bench. But I remember a couple times I felt like Angus was really behind me when I was going to the restroom, and I was like, Angus, back up, like you're walking on top of me.
And that's how Mary said he was. He would follow her everywhere. She'd be like behind the counter going in the kitchen. He'd just be there with his coffee mug. Like he would just be like up your butt kind of in a sense. So it's funny that like the spirit version of Angus is exactly like the human version, like following us around. Like, what are you doing? Where are you going? What's happening now? And Zee always was sitting in that one seat. That was Angus's seat. And she had no idea. And somehow she's like, I like this seat. I'm going to sit here every time. And we found that out. We were all like, mind blown.
Yeah, that's such a comforting presence that he has. I've always felt like we were protected and blessed because Angus is there.
Right. Yeah. He feels like just like another personality of our tribe. Like he's just there. He just wants to be a part of it. He likes the attention or he likes the energy, so he's attracted to it. Um, but he's not as like attention seeking anymore. And that we like once we acknowledged his presence and we've talked about it in detail, like every once in a while, we'll be there. Z will be like, bye Angus or hi Angus, just like calling it out to the shop just to give him acknowledgement that he is there and we appreciate his company and his protection.
Yeah, and at some point we'll have another podcast about what to do if you're living in a haunted house or something like that. But part of this is about that. You just simply acknowledge that person because often that's what they want, just to be acknowledged about who they are and the role that they played in that space. And that's what Angus is asking for. You've always been very compassionate with him, never made fun of him. Well, but you've always been so compassionate with him and so acknowledging Dan. That's so important to him. It feels like that important part of his life, just transitioned over into the afterlife.
Yeah, I think it's just his personality. It was an aspect of it. Like he was high in the military. He always had like inferiors, and then he kind of like was one of these people that retired. And he's like, now I'm kind of just like everybody else. So him being in the coffee shop, he felt like he was in charge of it. And maybe one sense it was his territory and it's his place to protect and be that authoritative figure in, not like in a bad way, but like he claimed ownership of it in a sense, that shop. And he still kind of claims ownership and he likes to hang out. He liked to hang out there in his waking life. He's hanging out there on his other life now. And that's his spot. He has a shrine to him, he has his seat. And anyone that sits in that seat says the same thing. I'm freezing. It's cold right here.
And again, if somebody has that situation in their house, they're often afraid to acknowledge somebody who's there
Mhm.
because they're afraid it'll make it worse. But I think it makes it better. I think you
Yeah,
acknowledge that person.
I think it's like you have to like realize like this energy that you can't see is still there. Maybe they're not trying to scare you. They're trying to get you to validate their existence because they want to cohabitate with you, right? Like they were there before you. Their energy is still there, and they just want to share the space and let you know I'm here. It could just be one of those things like they just want to be acknowledged. They just want to know that you know that they're there, right?
Yeah. And that's what you said in our tribe. And I think it went a long way with Angus. So,
Hmm.
all right. Well, we have a lot more stories that we could share, but we'll save those for another day.
Yep, and it was great doing this, getting this stuff off our chest.
You have some freaky deaky stories, Dan.
So do you, Z.
Thank you guys for being here. Please like and subscribe. We would appreciate it. And I'm Z.
I'm Dan.
Thank you for being here. And we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys. Thanks for watching.